Summer's officially here, and the bikini sale at shackshop.us is happening right now. Get hot styles, bold prints, and perfect fits, all on sale for a limited time. Whether you're beach-bound or poolside, we've got the bikini that makes you feel confident, cute, and totally summer-ready. So don't wait. Head to shackshop.us and shop the sale before it ends. That's shackshop.us, your new favorite bikini spot.
Republican Iowa Senate Joni Ernst is introducing wide-ranging new legislation aimed at combating fraud across federal programs, responding to what she and other GOP lawmakers describe as a massive failure of oversight exposed by the ongoing Minnesota welfare and social services scandal. The proposal, set to be formally introduced Thursday, would establish early warning systems designed to flag suspicious activity before fraud spirals out of control, overhaul how federal childcare dollars are distributed, require states to report sharp spikes in healthcare billing, and push federal agencies to aggressively recover taxpayer funds lost through fraud or improper payments. Speaking exclusively to Fox News Digital ahead of the bill's release, Ernst said the scale of alleged fraud uncovered in Minnesota should serve as a wake-up call for Washington. It's absolutely unacceptable that fraud running rampant in Minnesota could end up costing American taxpayers more than $9 billion, Ernst said. My Putting an End to Learning About Fraud Act will ensure this never happens again by putting stronger safeguards in place, detecting scams earlier, and requiring the recovery of any money ripped off from taxpayers. Federal prosecutors investigating multiple Minnesota cases have warned that alleged fraud schemes involving childcare assistance, food aid, and other social services programs could ultimately total billions of dollars, a figure Republicans say underscores systemic weaknesses in federal oversight. Ernst's legislation seeks to address those weaknesses head-on. A fraud scandal that sparked a national reckoning. The Minnesota fraud scandal has become one of the most significant alleged abuses of federal social services funding in recent history. Over the past several years, investigators say loosely monitored programs were exploited by fraudulent operators who billed the government for services that were never provided or dramatically inflated costs. Dozens of arrests have already been made, and investigations remain ongoing at both the state and federal levels. Prosecutors have said the total losses could reach as high as $9 billion, though final figures have not yet been determined. Republicans have seized on the case as evidence that federal programs are vulnerable to large-scale fraud when safeguards are weak and oversight is inconsistent. The Minnesota case is the canary in the coal mine, Ernst said. If this can happen there, it can happen anywhere. Democrats, including Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, have acknowledged failures in oversight, but have pushed back on what they describe as inflated estimates and politically motivated attacks. Still, the sheer scale of the alleged fraud has driven bipartisan concern and intensified calls for reform, particularly in programs involving large sums of federal money flowing through state agencies. The Putting an End to Learning About Fraud Act, Ernst's proposal, formally titled the Putting an End to Learning About Fraud Act, takes aim at fraud through a combination of prevention, detection, and recovery. According to her office, the bill focuses on two primary areas where investigators say fraud has been especially prevalent: federal child care assistance programs, healthcare reimbursement, and billing systems. In addition, the legislation would impose new requirements on federal agencies to recover improper payments and publicly report their efforts to reclaim taxpayer funds. The bill's name references the now infamous Quality Learning Center daycare sign, which became a viral symbol of the Minnesota scandal after online journalists highlighted apparent red flags, including misspellings and questionable documentation, that critics say should have triggered earlier scrutiny. Childcare fraud, from enrollment to attendance. One of the most significant changes proposed in Ernst's bill involves how federal childcare dollars are distributed to providers. Currently, many state plans reimburse providers based on enrollment, meaning payments may be issued even if a child does not consistently attend care. Critics argue that system creates opportunities for fraud, allowing unscrupulous providers to collect taxpayer money for services that were never delivered. Under Ernst's proposal, states receiving federal child care funds would be required to reimburse providers based on documented attendance, not enrollment alone. The bill would also clarify that states may issue payments after services are delivered, rather than providing upfront funding, a shift proponents say could significantly reduce fraud risk. This is basic accountability, Ernst said. Taxpayers should not be paying for care that never happened. Record-keeping and audits. To reinforce accountability, the legislation would require child care providers receiving federal funds to track daily attendance, maintain attendance records for 7 years, make records available for audit by the Department of Health and Human Services, the U.S. Attorney General, the Comptroller General. Supporters say extended record retention would make it far more difficult for fraudulent operators to cover their tracks or evade detection after the fact. Critics of the proposal have raised concerns about administrative burden, particularly for small providers, but Ernst's office argues that legitimate providers already track attendance and should have no trouble complying. Healthcare fraud and the rise of spike alerts. Beyond childcare, the bill also targets healthcare programs, another area where improper payments cost taxpayers billions of dollars annually. According to the Government Accountability Office, improper payments across federal programs total tens of billions of dollars each year, with healthcare accounting for a significant share. Ernst's legislation introduces a new concept she calls early warning tripwires.
What triggers an alert? Under the bill, states would be required to notify the Department of Health and Human Services if payments for a specific healthcare service increase by more than 100% in a single year, or the number of providers billing for a service rises by more than 100% year over year. Those alerts would not automatically accuse providers of wrongdoing, but would trigger additional scrutiny to determine whether the surge reflects legitimate demand or potential fraud. Supporters argue that sudden spikes in billing have historically been a key indicator of organized fraud schemes, but that such spikes often went unnoticed until losses became massive. Waiting years to act is how you lose billions, Ernst said. These alerts are about catching problems early before they explode. Clawing back taxpayer dollars. While prevention and detection are central to the bill, Ernst has emphasized that recovery is just as important. If taxpayer money is stolen, it shouldn't just be written off, she said. It should be recovered. The legislation would require the Office of Management and Budget to issue updated guidance directing federal agencies to actively pursue recovery of improper payments, whether those payments resulted from fraud or administrative error. Inspector General reporting requirements. In addition, inspectors general at federal agencies would be required to submit annual reports detailing the amount of improper payments identified, the amount successfully recovered, the methods used to pursue recovery. Those reports would be made available to Congress, allowing lawmakers to track which agencies are effectively protecting taxpayer dollars and which are not.
The Minnesota scandal has not only triggered federal investigations, but also reshaped the state's political landscape. Governor Tim Walz, who has served since 2019, announced earlier this year that he would not seek re-election amid growing scrutiny of the state's handling of federal funds. While Walz has acknowledged that fraud occurred under his administration, he has rejected claims that his office ignored warning signs or allowed wrongdoing to continue unchecked. Whoever is in charge, whether these programs started before we got here or afterward, it doesn't matter, Walz said earlier this month. We're here now. We're the ones fixing it. Walz has also argued that Republican lawmakers have exaggerated the potential dollar figures for political gain, describing some estimates as sensationalized. The Squeal Award. Fox News Digital also learned that Ernst plans to name Walz as the January recipient of her office's monthly Squeal Award, which highlights government waste, fraud, and abuse. Ernst's office said Walz earned the designation for failing to stop runaway fraud in his own backyard. The award, which Ernst has issued for years, is intended to draw public attention to cases where government oversight breaks down or taxpayer money is wasted. Ernst has long positioned herself as one of Congress's most aggressive watchdogs on waste and fraud. She currently leads the Senate Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE caucus, which was launched as President Donald Trump prepared to return to the White House. The caucus focuses on reducing bureaucracy, increasing transparency, and cutting wasteful spending across the federal government. According to Ernst's office, DOGE-related initiatives have produced more than $15.1 billion in verified savings for taxpayers. Supporters say the new anti-fraud bill fits squarely within that mission. This isn't about politics, Ernst said. It's about protecting taxpayers. Support, criticism, and what comes next. Republicans have broadly praised the proposal, calling it a necessary response to a system that allowed alleged fraud to flourish. Some Democrats have expressed openness to stronger safeguards, but caution against measures that could unintentionally restrict access to childcare or healthcare services. Policy analysts say the bill's fate will depend on whether lawmakers can strike a balance between accountability and administrative flexibility. Still, the Minnesota scandal has shifted the conversation. There's now bipartisan recognition that the status quo failed, one congressional aide told Fox News Digital. The debate is about how far reform should go. Ernst has repeatedly warned that Minnesota is not unique. The same vulnerabilities exist in other states, she said. If we don't act, this will happen again. By introducing early warning alerts, attendance-based payments, and mandatory recovery efforts, Ernst argues her bill would fundamentally change how fraud is handled, moving from reactive investigations to proactive prevention. In the era of DOGE, she said, crime no longer pays.